It's an honor to introduce a colleague and a friend, Derrik Williams, who's principal hydrogeologist with Montgomery and Associates, which has worked a lot with the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. So many of you already may know Derrik in one way or another. Um, just a public service announcement to all the people that are speakers today. Um, you can see what I'm doing, which is really seeking to project, or as we sometimes call it, eating the mic. So just be prepared. You're going to need to eat the mic, okay? Because we have some people here who need to get a little more assistance in hearing, and this is the best that we have right now in this speaker. So in advance, I'm warning all of you who are speakers and you who are participants here so it doesn't feel weird in the room. If I feel like the speaker isn't projecting, I'm going to briefly interrupt. So I apologize to speakers in advance, and I apologize to all of you as attendees. I don't normally like to do that, but we just want to make sure everybody can hear. So with that, we're going to move on to our next part, which is an overview of Salinas Valley from a water condition. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Derrik.
All right, thank you very much, Dave. I know many of you have met me before. For you who have not, I am Derrik Williams. I am a groundwater hydrologist and have been a consultant to the GSA for a number of years, working in the Valley. I'm going to talk a little bit to give some background on the Valley and why we're talking about uncertainty, why we're talking about management, what are the drivers of it. For many of you, this is going to be a review of things you already know, but I want everybody to be thinking and talking from the same kind of base knowledge. So we're just going to talk a little bit right now about groundwater in the Valley, what it's like, and what's driving us. Even more. Okay, I'm really working on it. So when we're talking about the Valley, this is the Valley we're talking about. You see on the right, we're talking about all the way down to the San Luis Obispo County line. That's it. And all the way up to the coast there. So we're talking about managing the whole area. You notice we've also included in the map the seaside subbasin all the way out there, even though they're under a different management scheme. The point of this is that the entire valley is managed in one way or another. It's a big valley. Management is going to be different in different parts of the valley. We realize that. But there's probably going to be at some point everywhere in the valley a decision that has to be made. How are we managing the groundwater? What decisions do we have to make? What sort of management actions might we need to undertake right now? So we're looking at the entire valley right now, even though we understand that the management's going to be different from one area to the other. We're not saying the whole valley is the same. As far as the importance, I don't think anybody is surprised about the importance of water in this valley. It underpins the entire economy. Our estimate there, we have about $5 billion in income, direct income, just from crops. Indirect income raises that to maybe $11, $12 billion. It's all underpinned by water there. Managing our water is what keeps our economy going. It's what keeps the valley going. So we need to have our plans in place to say, we know how we're going to keep this economy going. Agriculture is 1 out of every 5 jobs in the county here. We need to keep this going, and that's what the importance is of this management. Agriculture uses 91% of the water in the valley. I think most people know this. Urban uses about 9%, and what we're calling rural domestic, those are homes with their own wells. Those use less than 1% of the water. So it's largely an agriculture, largely the water use is agricultural. And when it comes to what type of water are we using, it's almost all groundwater. When we think of the Salinas Valley, there's a big river that runs through the valley. You think of the river running through the valley. That's not where water is generally taken from. Some 96% of the water is pumped groundwater. Now, it originates potentially in the river, but as far as how we manage it, we're managing it as groundwater. So basically, all the water we're using is groundwater, and that's what we have to manage here. That's why it's so important to us. All aspects of the valley depend on groundwater. That's shown here. Urban users are about 96% on groundwater. All rural residential homes are on groundwater. Agriculture is about 96% using groundwater. We put the environment on here also. There are some environmental impacts, but we don't have any numbers as to how much is our environmental impacts dependent on groundwater versus surface water flows. Clearly the fish are dependent on surface water flows. That's a little more difficult one. So there is some impact on the environment, but it's a little harder to quantify. As far as the economy of the area and our jobs, largely depending on groundwater here. So the water use, though, because we're using so much, it has led to some issues. And this is what I'm going to talk about a little. What are the issues that we have? How are they influenced by uncertainty? And so when you start thinking about what kind of management actions should we be thinking about, the question is, what are the challenges that we're going to have? What are the challenges we have to fix or address with our management actions? First, most obvious challenge, groundwater level declines. I think most people are familiar with this one. This is a map of groundwater levels in 2022 after a relatively dry year in the area. We have classified the wells. Each dot is a well. We've classified them as critically low groundwater levels. These are groundwater levels we want to raise here. Yellow dots are low groundwater levels. They're lower than we'd like, but it isn't immediately a problem if we raise them or not. And the green dots are sustainable groundwater levels. They're at a place that we're very happy with. And you'll notice after the dry year, we had a lot of red and yellow dots interspersed with some green dots. It's not a clear picture there, but there are a lot of red and yellow dots, wells that we think we need to raise these. They are at groundwater levels that are too low and could cause problems. This is after a dry year. 2023, as you all know, was a very wet year. We had a lot of recharge. And what happens, this is a map showing how water levels rose. The blue dots show where water levels rose over 20 feet between 2022 and 2023. The yellow dots show where groundwater levels dropped up to 5 feet. So it's all over the place, but in general, we're seeing groundwater levels rising during the wet year, and this is the uncertainty that we're going to be dealing with. This is the problem we have, is how do we go from one year to another when they're very different years in the very different rainfall years. And so when we compare the 2022 to the 2023 maps, you see on the left, the 2022 has a lot of red dots, a lot of wells that were critically dry. After a very extremely wet year, those water levels go up, and you see on the right, the 2023 wells, many fewer red wells, red dots, so many fewer wells that are critically dry, but there are still some. We still have some wells that have critically low water levels. Fewer yellow wells, those are the wells that have low water levels, but we still want to bring them up, and more green wells, but they're still interspersed, even down, say, in the King City area. You see a couple wells that are having red dots. They are still too low. They're critically low. And so this is the kind of the uncertainty that we're going to be talking about and dealing with, is both spatially and over time. Over time, we're going to have uncertainty in the weather. We're going to have uncertainty in our rainfall. How do we deal with that? And over space, you see that there are some places where the low water levels are more concentrated, but we still have problems pretty much up and down the valley, places that we need to raise water levels. The lower groundwater levels lead to the associated loss of groundwater storage. When I talk about loss of groundwater storage, I'm talking about how much groundwater do we calculate is just sitting there underground that we can access? Are we losing it or gaining groundwater storage? And this is a graph of groundwater storage in various parts of the basin over time. So the graph shows the x-axis runs from 1945 to 2022. So it's over time. And you see amount of change in groundwater storage is on the left side. That's in acre feet. So a line that drops means we are losing water over time. We just aren't keeping as much water in storage. We just don't have as much water that we can tap anymore. A line that's flat would mean over time we have about the same amount of groundwater storage. And you see it's different in different parts of the basin. This gets back to the point that it's spatially different in the basin.
Hey, Derek, just
Yes.
real fast, pardon to interrupt, but just as a reminder, as Derek's going through this, don't forget you've got note cards. If you need more, wave your hand. So if you've got questions or anything you want to ask to Derek when he's done, just jot them down, okay? So if anybody needs more cards, we'll get them moved around. Sorry, Derek.
Slide 13. There we go. Thank you, Dave. A couple other things about this. So you see that spatially, in some parts of the basin, we're over time, we have less and less water that we can pump there. Parts of the basin, not so bad. All parts of the basin, though, show some of the impacts of the uncertainty of droughts. This is the 1989 to 1993 drought right here, and you can see all parts of the basin. We lost a huge amount of water, and in many parts of the basin it recovered, and in some parts of the basin it did not. This is the 2015-2016 drought right there. Same problem. That's the type of uncertainty that we need to be thinking about. So for some places, it's short-term uncertainty. How do we get through droughts thinking that we can recover afterwards? For parts of the basin, it's a long-term uncertainty. What happens when you have a drought overlain on a long-term decline in groundwater storage? So these are the types of the problems we have, and this is one of the bigger problems in the basin. The other one that we want to talk about is seawater intrusion. It is an issue that's focused more on the coastal areas, but it isn't one of the major issues in the valley here. Seawater intrusion, I'm going to quickly talk about it if you're not familiar with it. If you are familiar with it, this will be a repeat. But quickly, what happens is historically, groundwater recharge is enough to push the seawater out to the ocean. As groundwater levels drop and we intercept the recharge, there isn't enough pressure to push the seawater out, and the seawater starts to come in on us, comes in from the ocean. So it's lower groundwater levels that cause seawater intrusion effectively. They're all connected here. To address seawater intrusion, and this will come up later in some of the talks that we have, the valley has taken a lot of actions to address seawater intrusion. So they built the Castroville Seawater Intrusion Project, the CSIP project. They built the reservoirs that provide water to come down to the CSIP and are able to manage water. There's been a lot done there. These are the big projects. These are the big projects we're not going to be talking about today here. But there have been some big projects that have taken place. It hasn't completely stopped seawater intrusion, though. So there are still some things we need to do. There are still some actions we need to do. And when we take these actions, part of the question is this an action that will address seawater intrusion or not? This is a graphic showing the number of acres that are impacted by seawater intrusion over time from 1944 to 2022. And so every bar shows the number of acres that have been impacted. You can see recently the number doesn't go up very much, but seawater intrusion still in the annual reports is starting to creep in more and more, especially in the 400-foot aquifer. One of the issues we have to deal with. Some additional challenges that are out there. We want to avoid having dry wells, especially for individual homes. Individual home wells have a tendency to be shallow and not go too deep, so they are going to be the first ones that go dry. As groundwater levels drop, we want to make sure we're protecting homeowners and we aren't drying out their wells. There is some contamination, nitrate contamination, naturally occurring arsenic we find in the groundwater. And then there's some environmental habitat degradation as groundwater levels drop, basically. both with plants and being able to feed groundwater, being able to feed stream. So these are some other issues I'm not going to talk about, but there are a number of issues that we have to think about when we think about managing groundwater. How are we addressing all of these issues? And so that's where we end up with, is we're going to have some uncertainty. The groundwater levels have fluctuated over time. They have some trends, but the droughts really impact these groundwater levels. And so there's uncertainty in future climate. When are we going to have droughts? How long are those droughts going to last? What's the impact of those droughts? We need to manage for the uncertainty, and we need to start managing for extremes. Talk about 2022 was a dry year. 2023 was an extremely wet year. We're starting to see extremes. Can we start planning for those? And groundwater levels, as I mentioned, groundwater levels in some parts of the basin are just lowering over time. We need to start talking about how we can raise those, at least stabilize and potentially raise those groundwater levels. Are there actions we can take that would help do that there? When we talk about raising groundwater levels, we really only have two knobs, and this is the key part, because when we start talking in the future, we're really only talking about one knob right now. There's two knobs that we have. We either increase the recharge, put more water in the basin, or we decrease the pumping, decrease the extraction. Those are the only two knobs we really have right now. They are both useful. The increased recharge has a tendency to be large projects there. Okay? And that's not the point of today's meeting. It's not that it's not important. It is an important part. And we're going to want to look at how we do that anywhere we can. But the point of today's exercise and today's workshop really focuses on the second part. Decrease pumping, manage pumping, spread out pumping, do what we can to say, how do we address the extraction part in order to stabilize or raise water levels, especially during uncertain times. What do we do when something unexpected happens and something that we didn't plan for? What can we do to help us stabilize those water levels? And I think that's my last slide. That's the quick introduction to sort of the groundwater science part of why we're here. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, if I can ask staff to help out really quickly and collect up some cards, question cards, that would be great. We've got one from Janet right here that I'll go ahead and read off. Well, you go ahead and hold it. So again, if you've got questions, just go ahead and pull the cards up and we'll feed it to Derrik. How much will raising groundwater levels address seawater intrusion?
Okay, so the question is, how much will raising groundwater levels address seawater intrusion? You can raise groundwater levels. There is a way to do it. It's what's done in Orange County. So in Orange County, what they've done is they've taken their recycled water and they inject it into the ground and they push the seawater intrusion back out. So they've basically used recycled water to raise water levels and push the seawater back out. It is a possible thing to do. You need a large amount of water to do that. And it is my opinion that we don't have enough water in this basin. We got a lot of water in this valley, but the amount of water it would take to do that, to raise groundwater levels, to fully push the seawater intrusion out, would be much too large. It helps, okay? When I say this, don't think that I'm saying we should not raise groundwater levels to help with seawater intrusion. It absolutely helps. Raising groundwater levels slows seawater intrusion or starts to push it out. But to really push it out you have to raise groundwater levels fairly high, and it takes a lot of water to do that. So it is a possibility, but it would be a difficult one in this valley.
Okay, next question. Slide 13.
Let's see. I don't know if there's an easier way to do this. There we go. There we go.
All right, there you go. Okay, loss of groundwater storage. Does this mean capacity has decreased or levels of water has decreased?
Good question. So the loss of groundwater storage, is this a capacity or a water level? This is a groundwater level issue. This isn't an issue about the wells. When you say capacity, I'm assuming the question is, do the wells still have the capacity to pump the amount of water that they historically have? In general, the wells still have that capacity. Their capacity will go down a little bit. But what's really driving this graphic is the dropping groundwater levels. The dropping groundwater levels are saying we don't have as much water in the valley. And so if you have all your wells that have the same ability to pump, but they're pumping less water, they're just competing for a smaller and smaller part of the pie. And that's where the problem comes in.
Next question. Explain how extraction barrier might help move seawater intrusion line back to the coast.
This is something I didn't talk about, but
that was for dramatic effect. Did you like that?
Little thunder.
Right.
This is something I didn't talk about, but some of you are aware, one of the options for addressing seawater intrusion is what we're calling an extraction barrier. And this is a line of wells somewhere near the coast that extracts the seawater before it comes in too far. Let me see if I can get the picture of seawater intrusion. So the idea on the extraction barrier would be to put a new well somewhere close to the coast and start pumping it. It would draw water from the ocean to it. It would also draw water from the up basin part into it. So it would draw water from both sides, but what it does is it prevents the seawater from going any farther. You basically capture all the seawater before it gets into the basin, and you take it and you either dispose of it or clean it up and use it, whatever you want to do there. So this is the idea of the extraction barrier. You need a line of wells all along the coast to do that. And they basically form a picket fence. You can think of it as a picket fence of wells that are all working together to stop the seawater intrusion from going any farther there. It's the exact inverse of what I mentioned is going on in Orange County. In Orange County, they have wells near the coast and they're pushing water in to the ground and pushing the seawater out. The extraction barrier does just the opposite. It puts a well in and it pulls the seawater to you, but it prevents the seawater from going any farther. And then you either dispose of it or clean up the water, whatever you want to do. That's how the extraction barrier works.
All right, last question that I've got. So if anybody else has got other cards, please go ahead and raise them up and colleagues will come and grab them. When might there be grant funding for recharge basins on private property? Correct?
This is not my specialty. The question is, when might there be grant funding for recharge basins on private property?
His title is Principal Hydrologist, not Principal Money Guy.
I think it's a trap.
Correct.
I think
you need to eat the mic.
more. I think it's a trap. I think it's a setup for me. As you know, state is in the budget situation at the state level is not rosy. It's opposite of that. So it's unknown. There are bonds in works that maybe some of the projects could be included. We could use all of you and your influences to talk to our representatives, state level. There's also federal funds. So at the moment, there is no planned round for the next Sigma implementation activities and projects. What we can do as an agency, though, we can put ourselves in a good place that when the money becomes available, we are being viewed as a responsible agency that has achieved already things and can be trusted to, let's give you more money because you're going to be doing good things with that. Shovel-ready projects. So I think at the moment there is no earmarked money, but I would not let that to stop us of kind of counting and getting ready.
Okay, any last questions before we change gears and move on to our next agenda item? Yes? Say it very loudly. Okay.
I'll repeat it. Go ahead.
Go.
Right. So the question again about the extraction barrier. If we put a well near the coast and it draws water from both the ocean side and the valley side, eventually this seawater intrusion wedge that you see here, if we're lucky, gets pulled back to this well, and we start drawing in fresh water also to this well. And the question is there a downside to that? Are we doing something such as, are we pulling fresh water out of the valley that we don't want to? And this gets to the point I said about what you do with the water once you extract it, because you could dispose of it, or you could send it to a desalting plant, you could clean it up and pull some of the fresh water back out of what you've pumped. Again, just dispose of the very salty water, but you could extract the fresh water back out of what you've pumped and serve it or inject it or something like that. There probably would be a problem if you just disposed of all the water. You probably would run into a problem. But there are a number of options that we have for taking some of the fresh water back out of what we've pumped and then using it back in the valley there.
All right, well, let's give Derrik a hand, please, for his presentation.